store clerk ignored the old man's warning. Hours later, the entire SWAT team thanked him. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Murphy's Corner Store, a small convenience shop nestled on the outskirts of Millfield, Georgia. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the bell above the door hadn't worked in 5 years, and where the locals still paid with exact change counted out slowly from worn leather wallets. Behind the counter stood Derek Thompson, 23 years old, and perpetually checking his phone between customers. He'd been working at Murphy's for 2 years now, saving money for community college while dreaming of bigger cities and better opportunities. To Derek, this job was temporary, a stepping stone to something more important than ringing up lottery tickets and energy drinks for the same faces day after day. The familiar shuffle of worn boots announced the arrival of Walter Kowalski, a fixture in the neighborhood who visited the store at least twice a week. At 78, Walter cut an unremarkable figure. His gray beard was uneven and slightly unkempt. His faded army surplus jacket had seen better decades, and he walked with a slight limp that favored his left leg. Most people in town knew Walter as a harmless old-timer who lived alone in a small house 3 blocks away, someone who talked to himself while walking and occasionally muttered about things not feeling right. "Afternoon, Walter," Derek said without looking up from his phone, where he was scrolling through social media posts from friends who'd escaped small-town life. Walter approached the counter slowly, his pale blue eyes scanning the store with an intensity that seemed oddly out of place for someone buying milk and bread. "Derek, son, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice carrying an urgency that immediately struck Derek as unusual. "What's up?" Derek asked, finally putting his phone down but maintaining the tone of someone humoring an elderly relative. Walter leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "There's been a dark sedan parked across the street for the past hour. Same 2 men inside, not talking, not getting out. One keeps checking his watch, the other's watching your store through binoculars." Derek glanced toward the large front windows but couldn't see much through the glare of the afternoon sun. "Walter, it's probably just someone waiting for a friend, or something. This isn't exactly a high-crime area. I know what I'm seeing, son." Walter's voice carried a quiet conviction. "I've been watching people for longer than you've been alive. These men, they're conducting surveillance. The way they're positioned, their line of sight, the fact that they've moved their car twice to maintain visual contact with your register. This isn't casual." Derek couldn't help but let out a small chuckle. "Walter, with all due respect, this is Murphy's Corner Store, not Fort Knox. We sell chips and soda, not state secrets." At that moment, Mrs. Henderson entered the store, her weekly grocery basket in hand. She overheard the tail end of the conversation and smiled knowingly. "Is Walter telling you about his conspiracy theories again?" she asked with the fond exasperation of someone who'd lived in the same small town for decades. "Just trying to keep everyone safe, Mrs. Henderson," Walter replied with dignity, though Derek noticed the slight deflation in the old man's shoulders. "Walter, you've been watching too many crime shows," Derek said, his tone becoming more dismissive. "Maybe you should head home and get some rest." Walter studied Derek's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I hope you're right, son. I truly do." He purchased his usual items, milk, bread, and a small bag of coffee, and headed toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back one more time. "Derek, if anything feels off tonight, anything at all, you call the police immediately. Don't hesitate." "Sure thing, Walter," Derek replied, already turning back to his phone. Mrs. Henderson shook her head as Walter left. "That poor man. Living alone for so long, I think his imagination gets the better of him sometimes." As the hours passed, Derek found himself occasionally glancing out the window, though he told himself it was just Walter's paranoia getting to him. The afternoon crowd thinned out, replaced by the usual evening customers grabbing dinner items and beer. The sun began to set, casting the parking lot in an amber glow that made it harder to see clearly outside. Around 8:30, as Derek was restocking the cigarette display, the bell above the door chimed. 2 men entered the store, both wearing dark clothing and baseball caps pulled low over their faces. Derek nodded in their direction, a standard greeting, but something about their body language made him pause. The first man, tall and broad-shouldered, made a beeline for the back of the store toward the restroom. The second, shorter but with an athletic build, began walking slowly through the aisles, not really shopping but rather seeming to examine the store's layout. He paused at the security camera mounted in the corner, tilting his head up to study it. Derek felt a flutter of unease in his stomach. The men weren't talking to each other, but there was something coordinated about their movements, something deliberate. He remembered Walter's words about surveillance and felt foolish for even considering them, yet he couldn't shake the growing tension in his chest. The shorter man approached the counter, but instead of making a purchase, he asked, "When do you close?" 11, Derek replied, noticing that the man's eyes were constantly moving, taking in the cash register, the door behind the counter, the sight lines throughout the store. "You work here alone at night?" The question sent a chill down Derek's spine. "Sometimes," he answered carefully, his hand instinctively moving toward the phone beneath the counter. Before the conversation could continue further, Derek's cell phone rang. The caller ID showed the local police department's non-emergency number. "Murphy's Corner Store," Derek answered, his voice betraying a slight tremor. "Derek, this is Officer Martinez with the Millfield Police. I need you to listen carefully and stay calm. We've received credible intelligence that your location may be targeted tonight as part of a larger criminal operation. I need you to quietly secure your store, lock the doors if you can do so discreetly, and stay behind the counter until we arrive." Derek's blood turned to ice. The two men were still in the store, the taller one having emerged from the restroom and now standing near the ATM machine. I understand," Derek whispered into the phone. "Units are en route. Stay calm, stay safe, and do exactly as I've instructed." As Derek hung up, he realized his hands were shaking. The shorter man was watching him intently, clearly having noticed the change in Derek's demeanor. Outside, Derek could now hear the distant sound of sirens approaching, growing louder by the second. The two men in the store suddenly looked at each other with sharp recognition. Without a word, they began moving toward the front door, but their casual demeanor had vanished, replaced by urgent, predatory movements. Derek's training from the store's robbery prevention seminar kicked in, and he hit the silent alarm button beneath the counter. The sirens were now clearly audible, multiple vehicles converging on the location. Within minutes, the parking lot was flooded with flashing red and blue lights. Derek watched through the window as members of a SWAT team positioned themselves around the building, their movements precise and professional. The two men who had been in his store were now face down on the asphalt, being handcuffed by officers in tactical gear. The next hour passed in a blur of questions, statements, and explanations. Detective Sarah Chen, the lead investigator, explained to Derek that his store had been identified as a target for an armed robbery that was connected to a larger interstate criminal ring. The two men apprehended were part of a crew that had been hitting small convenience stores across 3 states, escalating their violence with each robbery. "How did you know?" Derek asked, still trying to process everything that had happened. "We got a call from someone who recognized surveillance patterns and reported suspicious activity," Detective Chen replied. The caller provided detailed descriptions of the suspect's vehicle, their positioning, and their behavioral indicators. "Without that tip, we wouldn't have been able to prevent what could have been a very dangerous situation." As Derek was giving his final statement, he noticed a familiar figure walking slowly across the parking lot. Walter approached the scene, his face creased with concern as he took in the police cars and tactical vehicles. What happened next left Derek speechless. Commander Mike Rodriguez, the SWAT team leader, immediately walked over to Walter with the expression of profound respect. "Walt," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you." Walter shook the commander's hand with quiet dignity. "Glad everyone's safe, Mike." Derek watched in amazement as several other officers approached Walter, each treating him not as the eccentric old man Derek had dismissed, but as someone deserving of genuine respect and gratitude. Detective Chen noticed Derek's confusion and walked over to explain. "Derek, meet Walter Kowalski, Retired Special Activities Division, Central Intelligence Agency. Walter spent 32 years conducting covert operations and threat assessment around the world. Since retiring to Millfield 8 years ago, he's called in suspicious activity reports that have prevented 4 robberies, 2 domestic violence situations, and 1 potential kidnapping. Derek felt his face flush with embarrassment and shame. "Walter," he began, "I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you." Walter turned to face the young man, his eyes kind but serious. "Derek, you couldn't have known. But I want you to understand something important. Experience isn't always about degrees or fancy titles. Sometimes it's about learning to see patterns that others miss, learning to trust your instincts even when they seem paranoid." Commander Rodriguez joined the conversation. Walter noticed the suspects conducting what we call pre-operational surveillance. Their vehicle positioning, timing, and behavioral patterns matched profiles we've been tracking for months. His call gave us the heads up we needed to set up containment before they could act. "I've been wrong before," Walter admitted to Derek. "There have been times when my paranoia got the better of me, when I saw threats that weren't there. But I'd rather call in 10 false alarms than miss the one time when people could get hurt." Over the following weeks, Derek found himself seeing Walter and the world around him through completely different eyes. The store owner, Mr. Murphy, insisted on giving Walter free groceries for life, calling him the guardian angel of Murphy's corner store. The local newspaper ran a feature story about Walter's quiet heroism, though Walter himself declined to be photographed or interviewed extensively. "I didn't do this for recognition," Walter told Derek one afternoon as they shared coffee on the bench outside the store. "I did it because I've learned that looking out for each other is what makes a community strong." Derek had requested to work the same shifts as Walter's usual visits, finding himself genuinely enjoying their conversations. Walter shared stories not of his classified work. Those details remained locked away, but of the importance of paying attention to one's surroundings, of treating every person with dignity regardless of how they appeared, and of understanding that heroism often came in quiet, unassuming forms. The transformation in how the community viewed Walter was remarkable. Where once he had been seen as the odd old man who talked to himself, he was now greeted warmly by neighbors who finally understood that his vigilance had been protecting them all along. Children who had once avoided him now waved enthusiastically when they saw him walking through the neighborhood. But perhaps the most significant change was in Derek himself. He found himself more observant, more respectful of the elderly customers who shopped at Murphy's, and more willing to listen when someone expressed concerns, no matter how unusual they might seem. One evening, about a month after the incident, Derek was working the late shift when Walter came in for his usual purchases. As the old man prepared to leave, Derek called out to him, "Walter, can I ask you something?" "Of course, son. How do you do it? How do you stay so vigilant all the time without becoming paranoid or scared?" Walter paused thoughtfully. "Derek, I learned a long time ago that the world can be a dangerous place, but it's also full of good people doing their best to live good lives. My job, whether it was official or not, has always been to help protect those good people. The key is knowing the difference between healthy awareness and paralyzing fear." He leaned against the counter, his voice taking on the tone of someone passing along hard-earned wisdom. "You don't have to be a former CIA operative to look out for your community. You just have to care enough to pay attention, to trust your instincts, and to speak up when something doesn't feel right." As Walter headed toward the door, he turned back one final time. "And Derek, next time someone tries to warn you about something, even if it seems unlikely, remember that it costs nothing to listen and everything to ignore." Derek nodded, understanding now that he had learned one of life's most important lessons, that heroism and wisdom often come in the most unexpected packages, and that dismissing someone because of their appearance or age might mean missing out on the very protection and insight we need most. The last image anyone who visited Murphy's corner store would remember was Walter Kowalski, sitting on the bench, outside, sipping his coffee and watching the world with eyes that had seen too much, but still chose to hope for the best. Children would wave, adults would nod respectfully, and Derek would always make sure to step outside during quiet moments to check on the man who had taught him that true strength lies not in being impressive, but in being present, vigilant, and humble enough to serve others without expectation of recognition. In a world that often overlooks its quiet guardians, Walter Kowalski had become a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear worn army surplus jackets and carry the weight of protecting others with nothing more than experience, instinct, and an unshakable commitment to doing what's right. A truly remarkable reminder that heroes and extraordinary kindness can be found in the most unexpected places. What did you find most inspiring about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone was revealed to be far more than they seemed, or seen an act of kindness change a life? We'd love to hear about it. If stories like this warm your heart and restore your faith in humanity, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe for more, and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next uplifting tale. Thanks for watching.